Welcome to the Cornwall Insight podcast. Today we're going to be talking about smart energy data, what it is, how we can use it, and how smart energy data could play an integral role in decarbonising the whole energy system. Before we dive into this, though, we'll just do some introductions. My name is Oliver Archer. I'm a senior analyst in the retail team at Cornwall Insight. So normally I'm working with companies across domestic supply markets in GB, but also increasingly looking at smart homes, smart systems, and electric vehicles as well. I'm joined today by Jacob Briggs. Would you like to just introduce yourself?
Hiya. So I'm Jacob. So I work in the consultancy team at Cornwall Insight. So kind of similar focus to Oliver. So looking at kind of like applications of energy data for cool customer propositions, with probably, again, that kind of focus, particularly around EVs and transport for me.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. So obviously energy data is a really big topic. It's going to be instrumental across generation, distribution, consumption with the whole energy transition. We'd need a whole series of podcasts and a range of experts to cover everything off. What we're going to be doing today is really focusing our discussion on household energy data and the uses and applications of that data. So what I'd like to do is start off with what data companies have access to now, what they're doing with that data, and then maybe look a little bit more at the more transformative potential we see a little further down the road. So first off, can I just ask you, what do we mean when we talk about energy data? What kind of sources are there for household energy data available currently, and what are companies doing with that?
Yeah, so I suppose basically when we're talking about energy data, really, I think most often we're just talking about like the metering or the consumption data for that household that can be collected, accessed remotely and more regularly for kind of smart meter customers compared to basically like a traditional standard meter household. What companies are kind of doing with that data. I suppose there's a whole host of different applications ranging from basically just having a better idea of what that household's using and using that information to, I suppose, basically be a better supplier, I suppose, in many respects. But I think a lot of the more exciting and interesting applications really come from kind of what can be done when that kind of energy specific or that consumption data can kind of be integrated with different data sets, be that on kind of like individuals' profile, their activities, or kind of other data sets like, I don't know, say weather data, and being able to provide more granular or bespoke view of like what the consumption profile for that household might look like over the next couple of months. If you're providing a managed payment service or something like that you could say, well, hey, based on kind of what we expect the weather to look like over the next couple of weeks, and based on how you've kind of used energy and your like known routines, that kind of thing as a household, we think this is what your bill is going to look like for the next 2 weeks. Either then, hey, it's going to be materially less than it was a couple of weeks ago, good news, or perhaps there's a kind of like early warning to that customer that it looks like you might be having to use more energy over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, that's great, Jacob. It's like a more detailed example of one of the things you can do with forecasting and data. Maybe we could just go back to the basic difference between this smarter data and how things were with more traditional meters. Could you tell us just like how granular are we going with that data? How much can we discover about what households are using and what they're doing with that energy? And then maybe just run through a few of like the basic applications for improving your service to customers as an energy supplier off of the back of that.
Yeah. So in terms of like the kind of core differences in how granular that goes. So it does depend, but it can kind of range from anything like a half hourly view if you're kind of just using that smart meter data as is, basically. But if you've, say, gone and installed like your own proprietary consumer access device, or that you've got like your own piece of hardware there that's able to interface with, or that's able to engage with that kind of consumption data, then you could be collecting kind of like hundreds of thousands of data points every second. And particularly when you kind of get to that level, that's where a lot of the, I suppose, really intricate energy facing services can kind of come out of. It's having that incredibly granular and detailed view of what's going on at that household or at that meter point level.
So something I see quite a lot researching the connected home is people using that, maybe looking to use that much more granular data for stuff like remote diagnostics and monitoring of performance of appliances. Is that where we're seeing most of the consumer propositions appearing, or is there other stuff that suppliers are doing with the smart meter data and maybe the more basic half-hourly smart metering data?
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose we've been a little bit remiss here in that, like, kind of probably throughout this we'll be generally focusing on like domestic applications, but I think the that kind of like device level monitoring is a really interesting example of how broad the use cases for like better engagement with energy data can go. And if we look at kind of like big industrial and commercial sites, then some of the interesting kind of applications here are around like using that really granular, like large scale device level specific information to be able to like make predictive or assessments on like the potential maintenance requirements of asset and whether early intervention is possible. And really this is quite a nice example again of that it's not just about that kind of energy data in isolation, and it's about being able to integrate it with kind of other sources of information, even like kind of granular data as well, to be able to make those kind of like informed decisions. But if we kind of go back to that domestic side, and yeah, there is definitely that kind of like device level monitoring kind of piece going on. But like you say, there's definitely a whole host of internal and customer facing services that can be kind of delivered just from using the half hourly smart meter sourced consumption data as well. And I think perhaps a lot of these can come basically as like internal services for a supplier. So kind of being able to improve the efficiencies and accuracy of what they're doing. So that can come from like being able to significantly reduce like billing errors when they're kind of providing those bills out to customers, which is still kind of one of the leading sources of customers getting in touch to complain to their suppliers because there's been kind of problem or bills that they've received. And then also kind of for a supplier as well, being able to improve the kind of settlement performance and kind of save money there, as well as additional benefits that can come around kind of much improved opportunities for customer engagement and kind of better view of going on for those households as well.
Okay, that's interesting, Jacob. I guess we have seen some of that stuff around customer engagement coming through from, for example, suppliers looking to give some insight into a customer's usage and some tips on how they might improve the efficiency and reduce the costs on their bill. Is that the main kind of thing that's being offered to consumers?
Yeah, a lot of the kind of current services that we've seen being provided traditionally, I suppose, around kind of like smart metering and household consumption, they've definitely focused on that kind of like information provision piece. But I think there's an awful lot of value that can be derived from customers there, and it's probably worth noting here as well that although at the minute we're kind of like talking about the value from suppliers and the types of propositions that they're providing, it's definitely not the case that it's only suppliers that are delivering these services. And actually, I think probably a lot of the most kind of targeted and certainly kind of talked about ones from the energy side of from like dedicated platform providers or dedicated like intermediary services, your likes of like Elic, GenGame, that are kind of providing these effectively like customer facing data analytics and data assessment services into households to help them have that better idea of what's going on with their consumption. Where could they be saving money? Where is their kind of like learnings and efficiencies for them? But also that provide that building block for much more, I suppose, positive engagement with a customer. So both from a kind of like energy company looking out, but also from a kind of customer's experience of the energy sector as well, that it isn't just about receiving a bill once a month, once a quarter for what they've used, but that now there's this whole host of opportunities for like more regular contact and for more kind of positive contact with that customer and for that customer as well.
Yeah, I think that we'd both agree that from conversations, certainly with people in the industry, that these kind of applications are the focus really of exploration at the moment, and just the basics of improving your operations as a supplier and improving the experience of being the customer of an energy supplier. But I know that you also have conversations with companies that are looking to do maybe more innovative things. So what kind of other applications are people looking at, and what kind of timescales do you get the idea of that we're going to be seeing some of these more innovative applications appearing?
Yeah, it is probably a little dull of us to sit here talk about all the amazing things that can be done with energy data and then be stuck talking about smart meter consumption. But I think the kind of reason we want to lead off with that is that, to be honest, like that is probably still where we see, especially from the supply side, like that's what I suppose pays the bills for looking at these more innovative projects as well, is that there are kind of real valuable benefits from that data internally and customer facing today. But that, yeah, exactly like you say, that it's a lot of that kind of more innovative and forward-looking piece that really gets, I think, that certainly for me, keeps me interested in and gets me interested in this side of things, and for kind of most people looking in as well. And to be honest, like there's a plethora of different things that you could be doing and that we're seeing developed in the market, both from, and these range from like kind of more, I guess, energy specific and energy focused things like all in home energy management, or being able to transition to energy as a service, but kind of like heat as a service is probably a nice example of this. So being able to use granular data in terms of like the frequency with which it's accessed, and also the kind of granularity within a house as well, to be able to have like room by room smart heating controls, where you can either be kind of providing that customer with the agency to have real control over what's going on in their home with regards to how comfortable it is and how like well heated it is, or to be providing that to them on like a managed basis. And all of that is kind of underpinned by like access and engagement with that energy data at its kind of base point. But it kind of stretches a long way beyond that as well. Probably two, I think, interesting examples that we see quite a bit. The first is around, probably most approximate one, around EVs. So looking at what can be done to support customers being able to charge up their electric vehicle at either like, in multiples of maybe like the cheapest possible time for them, the most convenient time slots for them, or at the, I don't know, like the times at which the electricity on the grid's greenest, and that they can be kind of minimizing their own personal carbon impact as well. And kind of all of that kind of smart charging side definitely underpinned by being able to engage with that consumption data at a more granular level, and then doing something with it as well. So not just about being able to see it, but being able to provide, let's say, like a time of use tariff if you're the supplier, or to be able to like respond to different signals and deliver like an actually compelling platform to a customer that either they can use themselves, or that they can kind of input when they need to, and that it can be kind of managed on their behalf as well. And then the second one that I think I find really interesting as well is being able to use that energy for something that's completely like unrelated, that there's no kind of consumption side at all. And that's around some of like the remote monitoring services that we've seen. So I think there's been a couple of trials here, but one around all kind of broadly centered on being able to use like device and consumption level information to basically deliver or to support kind of like managed living and assisted living services. So like you can, for example, see if the person that's living in this assisted living facility has got up in the morning, that the kettle's turned on, or if they've kind of like whether they've deviated significantly from what you have been able to learn as like a kind of standard or expected routine for them. And using this not in what I recognise is the creepy remote monitoring sense, but in the like in such a way that you can provide like independence with a safety net, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting example of some of those, as you say, non-energy uses. But also, I think you bring up something important, which is as we make more and more use of this more detailed and readily available data, there is a shift in the relationship between the consumer and either the energy provider or, as you say, another external party. And I think the interesting element about the specific example you used was that we know that it's often people in older generations that are more resistant to that kind of change, particularly around sharing that data and discomfort around, for example, the idea that your smart speaker may always be listening. And it's certainly older generations that have a lower take-up of that kind of connected technology as well. So I think that brings us nicely into maybe discussing access to data and how companies are accessing it currently and what kind of protections there might be in place for the customer.
Yeah, and I think you've actually brought up a really important point that I've probably skirted around a little bit so far. There's definitely, I think, an awful lot to be done here in ensuring that these are services that are specifically designed to not just be as inclusive as possible, but that they can be specifically designed and built in with multiple different people use cases, requirements in mind. I think probably all too often we can kind of get carried away with looking to build something that's great with an early adopter market in mind, but that doesn't look to kind of address at its core different barriers to access and the ability for different people to be able to actually engage with those services. And that kind of age barrier is just kind of one example of that. And there's definitely a real opportunity here for a lot of these smart services to actually, at their core, look to kind of address some of the perhaps traditional barriers for being able to engage, participate, benefit out of the kind of energy supply space in particular, and energy service space in particular. Access to data is another good example of that, and I think we've probably been a little bit focused here on the ability of companies and service providers to access this data and do something with it. But probably equally, if not more important, I think is the ability for anybody else to be able to, for you or I to be able to see that data as well. And if we want to do something with it, to be able to kind of do that as well. And it's probably, I think, certainly for the energy industry, the ability to see and have visibility of the kind of data sets is perhaps not the greatest, and that a lot of the efforts around improving access, improving transparency have not always kind of progressed in the fastest possible manner. But there's definitely the potential here, I think, for real change and for real value to be had in kind of pulling down some of those barriers. I suppose in terms of for a service provider looking to come and access this data, if we just focus on the smart meter consumption data for now, that broadly you've got a couple of options: either be a supplier, partner up with a supplier, or become a other user within the DCC. So to be able to kind of access that central communication system that handles all of that smart meter consumption data. Perhaps we can come back to some of the barrier side of this in a little bit, but that isn't always kind of the smoothest or most straightforward process. But that once you have that, there are definitely those kind of protection in place that this isn't taking up a position in the panopticon to be able to see what's going on in every household on some attributed and assigned basis, that there are kind of the security and anonymity protections there that are needed, and that kind of ensuring that consumption data is classified correctly, and that this is personal and data that should have kind of all of the continued protections with it as well. And that kind of, I think customer consent is obviously kind of first and foremost to these services as well, and informed customer consent as well.
I think you raise a really interesting point about that access to data for the customer as well, not just for the supplier, and how useful that can be. And I think certainly as companies and suppliers begin to introduce these new services, there's a balance to be struck between making the products and the services as simple as possible for customers to engage in, and removing any burdens of participation, but also providing that information. So, for example, if a customer is participating in some kind of demand-side flexibility, they are aware of when their assets are being used and when their assets aren't being used, so they have that reassurance and understanding. If we look really to the future, when we're going to see more and more of those kind of services and more participation in the wider energy market by households, we hope, what do you think will change about just the basic service that a customer gets from a supplier? Like, how do you see us moving as households from people that receive a bill quarterly or monthly to households that participate in a much greater way in these services that are enabled by smart data?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there's a lot of different pathways that that households and individuals can take to be participating, and that kind of like the service providers can look to kind of take people along as well. And so I think in the near term, I think we're seeing a lot of kind of like the first steps on that journey being associated with I suppose purchases, or like taking on a technology that can really provide visibility to those to the benefits of kind of like that energy as a service, or the not so much even energy as a service, but the kind of outcome as a service, right? So the low cost green charging that's provided to them in the case of that kind of purchase being an electric vehicle, or in the like warm and low cost or warm and lower cost home in the case of like a heat as a service trial participant. A lot of the potential development routes for that energy as a service offering can kind of, I think, really be seen to increase and rise as those kind of like technologies proliferate. But I think it's probably also worth noting that it doesn't just have to be tied to like this buying a big ticket piece of kit to then be able to benefit. Like a lot of those activities that we're seeing in the market around like the energy management piece and the energy information piece, to be honest, I think a lot of the ones that we've kind of looked at and found most interesting at the moment are tied to like improving outcomes for prepayment customers, and that even from like that early transition of people like utilities to be delivering smart prepayments, and now like some of the moves around like managed credit positions, or around like forecasting and account management that are like looking to really take that data access and engagement to the next steps. Like a lot of those don't need any of that kind of like purchase side to come along with it, and that there's a wealth of different kind of opportunities for households to be engaged in this journey, and to kind of have to be able to realize some of those benefits as well.
Yeah, I think the prepayment example is right, because it's one where there's a very, very clear benefit for the customer in taking on the smarter technology and giving access to that smart data. And there's not really a very large barrier for them to do that. Whereas I think a lot of the other stuff we talk about to do with, flexibility or sharing a whole wealth of data to be given some insight on efficiencies, there is maybe more of a barrier to engaging in that and benefiting from it. And there's potentially less of a clear benefit as well. And we've looked at quite a lot of different domestic flexibility providers at the kind of rebates and savings they're offering to customers partaking. And often it's in, the tens of pounds or sometimes even lower a year for participating in those services, unless you have, as you say, the big ticket item like the electric vehicle or the battery. So I think that's a real clear barrier to some of these more innovative services being taken up, is the customer just not seeing the reason for engaging. And maybe I don't want to pay a monthly subscription for a fridge. It's not what I'm used to, and it has very limited benefits alongside that big engagement barrier. I don't know if we could maybe look at some of the other barriers that there are to some of these more innovative services you've been discussing, and what suppliers might be doing to overcome those as well, and other companies, of course.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually you're absolutely right on that barriers piece. And it's here that I think like the work of people like Sarah Holmes, for example, is quite interesting, of like looking to integrate this as kind of part and parcel from day one, in this case of housing development for like that kind of proper connected home position, and not just about kind of providing a smart home into individuals, but about being able to engage then with all the opportunities that brings around like providing flexibility services. And like this, there's a lot of kind of additional kind of use cases that you can see that, and a lot of ways to try and work around those like that potential kind of like high barrier to initial uptake or initial engagement. And yeah, so I think that's definitely not the kind of only barrier that we see with looking to like take part in that process, and say from a like service provider's perspective, be able to kind of get hold of the data and to do that kind of innovative thing, or to develop that innovative proposition that you're looking to bring forward. I think probably we've kind of touched on one of the core barriers I think that gets raised quite frequently around actual being able to access that data. So being able to pass some of the barriers to entry from a kind of energy market perspective. So whether that's having the kind of systems and services in place that meet the kind of accreditation requirements for that DCC other user status. If it's being understanding whether like going all in and taking on a supplier license is right if you're coming as a new entrant, or whether really that kind of brings with it requirements and obligations on you as a party that just aren't really aligned with the kind of market activity that you want to come in and undertake. Or if you're kind of somebody already in the market, the challenge that we've seen around, let's say, ensuring that like the systems that you operate in are able to like engage and do something with the like, even just the consumption data at that kind of like granular level, and that you're able to kind of, I suppose, really like secure the capacity, focus, time from staff in that business to develop the more interesting and forward-looking services, whilst also, if we just focus on the supply side for now, whilst also trying to be an effective and efficient supplier. There's definitely examples of parties that have done that successfully, but I think there's also examples where we've seen securing that kind of like internal capacity as potentially like a real challenge to try and to deliver some of these services. On the data side specifically, so in some cases and for some services specifically, I think we've seen that kind of data granularity and data quality side be potentially challenging as well. So, for example, like challenges in marrying up the like half-hourly data or half-hourly granularity of that smart meter consumption data as standard with the potentially like sub-second granularity that's required to go away and participate in some of those contracted balancing services to be able to be rewarded for actually delivering that flexibility product. And there are kind of, and this is probably one that I'll come back to as we go through these barriers, but there's definitely kind of mitigants and ways around that. So, for example, on the granularity side, going away and installing like your own hardware that can go beyond the like data granularity of the smart meter that can then let you access those services. That may then see you run into some of those data access side, particularly if you're looking to operate like a consumer access device. I know that's not always like the smoothest process in the market, but that there are kind of options and opportunities that come out of these kind of barriers as they are currently in the market as well. And I think that data access side is a good illustration of that kind of like barriers as presenting opportunities. So it's still early days for that kind of like DCC other user as a main route to market in the space, but we're already, and we know that there have kind of been some challenges for parties to access that reliably, but we're already seeing parties like Energy, for example, that are building like business models around providing access to that other user status then as a platform or as a service into kind of some of those like innovative business models that are looking to enter the market. And it's probably worth noting here that when we're talking about especially the kind of like data granularity piece, that isn't to say that like smart metering isn't fit for purpose because it doesn't give you granular enough data to go away and do participation in like FFR markets. That isn't kind of like what the smart meters are there for. But just because it can't do sub-second metering doesn't mean that they're failing or anything like that. just that they're basically like that smart meter is kind of the facilitator and to kind of these wider services.
So on that last point about the granularity of the metering, I guess we could go back and talk a bit about smart charging and how the industry is evolving in that area. I guess we could say that the applications here are furthest advanced in that space. So could you talk a bit about the different methods people are using to operate that smart charging, and maybe the role of the smart meter versus the role of other technologies in that?
Yeah, I think you're right to say, at least to my mind, this is probably where we're seeing like the most mature activity in that kind of like energy management space. And I think from some of the work that we've been doing, it's probably one that we've seen a lot of stakeholders kind of see as probably the most proximate or kind of near-term material opportunity around this or in this space. And that, there's a kind of wealth of different smart charging providers out there in the market currently, and that ranges from like suppliers that have built this in as part of their offering through to like dedicated charge management platforms, both domestically but also kind of increasingly at the public charging to an extent, but like commercial side or business energy market as well. And probably when we're talking about smart charging, we'll just kind of focus on that like one directional smart charging. So being able to moderate like the time of day that you're completing that charging session, or the sort of like the intensity of that charging session in response to kind of some kind of signal, and that we aren't just seeing kind of like different parties kind of providing that management service, but also kind of different means or different kind of channels through which that kind of charge management can be facilitated as well. So smart metering is definitely kind of one of those options, but also there's putting the intelligence, I suppose, in like the charging cable in the vehicle itself, in a kind of like fixed charge point in your property, say, or at the like depot that you're kind of providing that charge management service at for like a fleet of delivery vehicles or something like that. But there's a lot of different kind of avenues that can be used as well. But that if you want to be rewarded, as it were, by the energy system for the flexibility that you're providing and for the kind of like energy management services that you're providing, that engagement with that smart metering infrastructure and with the smart metering data is required to kind of access those benefits, but that we kind of see an awful lot of pathways to provide the service itself kind of potentially outside of that infrastructure, and that's definitely like an open question still in the market as to, or in the industry as to like what the what the enduring channel for delivering smart charging will be. Will there be one? If there is one, will it be kind of smart metering? I don't know. There is still a kind of, the consultation itself is closed, but an ongoing consultative process from government on this, and kind of a lot of exploratory work as well around like what might a role for smart metering look like on proportionate load control, for example, or is there a role for smart meters in like non-traditional settings? So, for example, in like on-street charging situations or in like commercial charging setups as well. Definitely, I think there is not yet like one kind of sole means of delivering this, and I think that's kind of partly what makes it so exciting, is that this isn't an answered question as to kind of what way we go, but where the jury is out is that smart charging is going to be like the default in terms of like the hardware capabilities, but also I think in terms of like a customer expectation as well, like that. Why would you pick a kind of service that doesn't give you that ability to charge at the lowest cost, to charge at the greatest convenience to you, to like match it up to like low carbon impact, that kind of thing? And I think we're definitely seeing the power of those types of services in the market at the moment.
So that stuff you're saying about smart charging, I imagine that for a customer, not only are you having a radically new experience having a vehicle that you have to charge up rather than fill up, we're also now having those charge times externally controlled. I suppose one of the important things for a customer for that experience is that they are sure that they're getting value for money in that arrangement, but they must also be concerned about having the charge ready when they need it.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think like there's definitely like a role for these services to like be able to ensure that kind of peace of mind is provided to customers. And so that might come from having nice simple inputs, say in the app, to set a parameter of, as long as I've got my vehicle charged by 80% or charged up to 80%, set a charge by 7 a.m, do what you want. And then I think like we certainly see that in like the offerings that are out there, and that kind of like can meet that peace of mind requirement for customers when they're using that service. And I think that kind of like peace of mind phrase is one that we've seen quite a lot in multiple different smart meter data focused services as well. And that can range from like that energy as service, comfort provision, kind of peace of mind side there, that you're receiving this kind of cool value added thing at the lowest cost to you, and that you're kind of not having to worry or engage if you don't want to, or to engage in the manner and to the extent that is right for you. And I think, but we also do see it in like the nearer term offerings as well. So I'm thinking here of like, say, automated switching service that can use your actual individual consumption to make sure that you're on a bespoke offering that's correct for you. I know we've seen kind of multiple parties offering that kind of service in the market. I think probably Labrador springs to mind for me as like somebody that came in initially like with that as like the kind of core part of that model of being able to provide that peace of mind to a customer that, hey, not just are you like being switched to be on a cheap deal in that kind of like traditional sense, but that it is specifically the right deal for you, that it's the kind of like wider requirements to engage in the market aren't there, and that you're kind of having that peace of mind provided to you and facilitated by kind of like access to that data to be delivering it at like a more kind of personalized level. And yeah, so I think that removal of hassle, as it were, is one that's kind of like common to or removal of hassle to the extent that to which a customer wants it is kind of common across a lot of these services. Because I know we've kind of focused on like managed service side, but I think a lot of the interest offerings that we see in the market, that is, there's like the opportunity and the ability for customers to be as involved in that kind of process as they want. I know one that we've looked at before from a kind of like retail offering perspective is somebody like Social Energy, right? And that there's the ability there for a household to just sit and kind of benefit from that solar plus storage and flex offering. But if they want to, like, I think they can probably on the back end drill in and see exactly what their like assets are doing and take as much involvement in that process as they want to. I think when we're talking about these managed services, it's important to know that this isn't about like locking a customer out of an opaque, like imposed management of their activities. That it's about providing the ability for a customer to take the as easier route or as a kind of like active involvement free route as they would like to.
Yeah, I guess the flip side of that is the importance, or what I imagine will be the increasing importance of solutions like machine learning as you get more and more assets of, for example, a household involved in flexibility services. So not just your charge point, but like you say, your battery, your solar generation, maybe appliances in the house as well. A customer may not want to set timescales for each of those devices. They may prefer to have a system that manages that whole piece for them, and maybe even like learns their lifestyle preferences to automate, optimizing their outcomes, but also the outcomes of the flexibility revenue generation as well. I guess we've been talking about those kind of services around the household, but there's plenty of stuff going on in business and in industrial settings as well, isn't there, Jacob?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you're right there. Like it's important that kind of people and customers aren't kind of presented as like passive parts of these services, but that they're engaged in, that they're put at the center of these propositions, definitely. And like I say, that is true, yes, in the domestic context, absolutely. But also, I think, like you say, in the multiple different areas that we're seeing this deployed, I think one that we've seen with quite a bit of interest lately actually is kind of how access to, or how like that consumption data and access to it and engagement, and using that to engage with kind of different energy markets and different energy services is being applied in the industrial and commercial part of the business market. I think an awful lot of parties looking at this space, particularly actually from the kind of demand side response perspective. So how can we, or how can they engage with the kind of like flexible or latent flexible opportunities from ranging from like assets that are installed at these big I&C sites, I don't know, like aggregated cold storage refrigeration units at like food storage location, for example, or like your kind of traditional battery storage like side as well. I think an awful lot of interest in how to engage with that part of the market, and not just from suppliers looking to build out their offering, but from a wide range of existing market participants and dedicated new entrants as well that are looking to really engage with that energy management side from the kind of like data perspective. So how to use that kind of like granular, in some cases, either like asset or site specific information to be able to get like build up that aggregated virtual power plant, and how to then apply like those more advanced concepts like like a trading algorithm, or using the machine learning approach to like optimize those within different energy markets as well, or against different opportunities in the energy markets as well.
Thanks, Jacob. I think we could probably talk about this stuff forever, and we've covered off a whole range of areas, talking about this whole brave new world that could grow out of the building blocks of smart energy data. I guess we should probably wrap up. So I'll just ask you one last question. When are we seeing this happen? When are we seeing these new propositions entering the market and becoming widespread and universal? Is it 2021? Is it 2050?
I think there's two bits to that question. When are we seeing them like in the market and available for people now? Like there's lots of different, like to different extents, but lots of different like data centric or propositions that are out there, or propositions where engagement with customer data is kind of at the core of being able to deliver value from them. When they're ubiquitous or mainstream, or like a common part of them, if we just look at this from the energy side, a common part of the energy market, that might be a slightly different timeline, and it probably depends at which of those kind of opportunities we're looking at. If it's on like say EV charge management and EV smart charging, they're around common, normal to see today domestically, or in the domestic space, in the business space, and I think that will only increase as the penetration of electric vehicles rises as well. If we're looking at something like widespread like heat management, or widespread heat asset management, or heat as a service provision, you're probably looking at slightly longer term timescales there. Again, like there's absolutely examples of trials that are going on in the market today, and I think the energy systems catapult ones provide like, or make for fascinating reading and really interesting studies, but don't represent like the kind of common approach to heat management, and probably 5+ years probably before we'd start to see those as a more common feature of the space. In terms of like your assisted living through remote device monitoring and that piece. Again, like there's absolutely trials that are underway at the minute, and there's examples of them like being deployed and out there. But again, that for that to be like a normal, widespread, common feature that everybody's looking to adopt, again, I think you're probably looking at like 5-10 years, something like that. And I think that side of like the services where it's tied to like the rollout of hardware is obviously like contingent on people being interested in that kit. And if we're looking at the heating one, like who knows what that pathway for domestic heat decarbonisation looks like at the moment. Like fascinating whether we go the electrification route, whether it's a kind of hydrogen option. I think it should probably be on the table more is like, is there a hybrid approach, not necessarily within a household, but like at that system level, are there multiple different approaches, and kind of what that means for that rollout of managed services to go alongside those. But if we're just looking kind of more generally at like data-led solutions being more common in the market and being the common element in the market, probably the sooner the better. And I think like the work from the Energy Data Task Force is probably one that we should have focused a little bit more explicitly on whilst we were talking about this, but is key. And like implementing the recommendations out of that task force is kind of core to being able to deliver this. And I think some of the follow-on competitions from that and like follow-on innovation projects from that are underway at the moment. And so like the sooner the learnings from those can be applied, the better. But we're definitely seeing like data-led offerings become far more prevalent and far more common in the market already, like from today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jacob. I mean, a really interesting space, developing fast at the moment. I know one that you do a lot of project work in. On my part, we're publishing a monthly roundup of key developments in the smart space, the connected home space. So do get in touch with either of us if you have any questions or you'd like to discuss this further. It would be great to hear from you. And for a limited time only, we can be offering a free trial of that connected home roundup service I mentioned. So if you'd like to sign up to that, please give me an email or a call. But now just say thanks for joining us, thanks for listening, and thanks to Jacob for having a really interesting discussion. Cheers.